Hello, everyone. I'm delighted to introduce Maggie Werner Washburne. She's been a longtime friend and mentor of mine, and she's also had an extraordinary scientific and mentoring career. There was a March publication of Include that contains Maggie's educational history, so I won't go into detail on that. But what I want to mention is that throughout her scientific career, she's published in many journals that have been cited over 10,000 times, which is an amazing feat for any scientist. And Irene mentioned her involvement in SOCNIS as the former SOCNIS president and also her AAAS award. And when Irene asked me to introduce Maggie, I tried to think about what, in my mind, makes Maggie an exceptional mentor. And I came up with 3 bullet points. The first is that she has an innate ability to think outside the box. This is readily apparent for anyone who has talked to Maggie within 5 minutes, that she has a unique mind. The second is empathy, and the third is her fancy red boots. She didn't wear them, but those of you who know Maggie, who have known her for a long time, might be aware that she has this pair of extraordinary, extravagant cowboy boots. They're vibrant red, black, mixed throughout the boot and the neck. They have these daisies going up the side, and they're not tiny daisies, they're big honkin' daisies, a variety of colors. And I think one of them even has a bird on it. They're very silly and funny and a beautiful piece of artwork, and I'll get to the relevance of these boots later. But as for my first bullet point, Maggie has an extraordinarily ability to think outside the box, and she likes solving complex and challenging problems through unconventional means. She imparts this ability onto her mentees, and they also get trained to approach a variety of problems from very different perspectives, which obviously is a very important skill. My second bullet point was empathy, and Maggie has a very strong sense of empathy, which allows her to connect to her mentees and form very strong long-term bonds. She understands that conducting good science is very difficult and at times can be frustrating, and she understands the challenges that women, minorities, and people from disadvantaged backgrounds face when they attempt to attain higher degrees in STEM. Despite these challenges and stresses, Maggie is able to convey effectively to her mentees that there's always room in our lives for our fancy red boots. Yes, some of the challenges we face currently in today's political climate are very serious and can be frustrating, but it's always important to remember why we got into STEM in the first place, why we're educators, and to enjoy life. And to me, that's what these fancy red boots represent. And with that said, I'd like to like us all to welcome my good friend Maggie while she talks to us about inclusion and diversity.
Well, thanks, Tom. How long have we've known each other? 12, 13, 14 years? Yeah, that's how long my mentoring goes. It's like, till I drop, I guess. So I want to thank, first of all, Irene and the DAC for inviting me, and Keystone. I want to thank the DAC for being here, and I want to thank everybody who's not in the DAC for being here. Because if we're going to figure out a way, and to get US-born minorities involved in science, and of course, you and I know, as most of us are probably have some connection with genetics, that Alberta or Albert Einstein could be anywhere, right? So we want to make sure that we don't miss the Navajo reservation and we don't miss all these places looking for people. So how many people here are from companies? Okay, good. And how many of you have diversity workshops and trainings in your company? And how many of you think those are like the most fun ever? See, that's the problem. That's the problem. When I heard taco trucks on every corner, it was like, I'm in heaven, and I think people didn't like it. So I don't know. It seemed like a good thing to me. I thought it was a great idea. So I just want to say that what I'm going to talk about today stems a bit from a meeting. I was on a council for 4 years at NIH, and so my mom's from Mexico, and I grew up, I don't look Mexican, but that's why it's an ethnicity. In any event, there was myself and an African-American guy out of 22 people, and these were all like people like you, very high-level people, right, on this thing. And so immediately they wanted me to talk about diversity because, oh my gosh, 2 out of 22 were there. And so I started talking, and one guy over here was chair of a department from a fancy school, and another guy who was God's personal surgeon said to me, thank you for laughing. I appreciate that somebody got that one. Anyway, they said to me that, you know, it's wonderful that you are interested in this work and that you get to focus on it. It's fantastic that you've found your place. But you know, this isn't anything to do with my life, and I have no idea why you're talking about this. And we just stopped. And the African-American guy didn't come back to the council for 3 years. And so I spent 3 years going out to dinner with these guys and trying to like understand their minds. So the talks that I give to minority communities are different from the talks I give to people who are in the position of hiring. And you'll see at the end how it all comes together. So this is the Andy Robertson talk. I wasn't going to have time to talk about his thing, so I put his life principles on the tables, and you can take a picture of them. I can't read the last one because I said that word in DC to someone who was a climate change denier, and he told me to watch my language, so I'm really trying to be careful. But no, I love talking. So I love living in New Mexico because I have friends from the whole range of things, and I always say to people, it doesn't matter to me who you voted for. It doesn't even matter, who you listen to. It just matters to me what you stand for. So the goals of this presentation, first of all, because we haven't made a dent in diversity in the faculty, we haven't made a dent in the diversity of the C-suites of organizations, we haven't made a dent really in business schools, we haven't made a dent in administrations except for that little diversity office that always hires a minority to be there. And so what I want to talk about is rethinking and reframing our options in terms of inclusion and diversity, because this is a hard problem. In this process, what I hope to do is to have you experience a little bit of my process in trying to solve what I call chronic hard problems. And at MIT and Stanford, they call them wicked problems, but they have the assumption that they can't be solved. And I come from a Mexican background, and we know we can solve everything with a little bit of tinfoil and some duct tape. So, these chronic hard problems are problems that have been generational. They're highly significant, but for which we have not found solutions. And it ranges from education to diversity to polarization. And I realize it includes liver function. So I'm like really excited to study livers now. So our country has a drama going on right now. If you're on any of the social media, you actually know about this. And I think that the issue is that there are opportunities when we have turbulent times. And so I'll talk just briefly about some other turbulent times and what we gain from finding our path through these. I want to talk about, let's see, go here. We don't actually know what the problem is in terms of diversity and inclusion, because if we knew exactly what the bottlenecks were, we would have solved it. It's been 30, 40 years, and we haven't pushed the dime. We had some assumptions, so I want to talk about our assumptions, the results, and what we got wrong. Then I want to talk about rethinking the process, and this will be talking a little bit about education, and it'll be talking a little bit about diversity and inclusion, and talking about models, reframing, and this is where you get the chronic hard part. It's when humans are involved. So, and finally, I want to talk about, just briefly, about career mentors and mentees, bringing in a model that I hope you relate to that will help you maybe think about what a career mentor can do and a mentee and what that relationship's all about. So this is a picture of Aguascalientes. It's October 2014. Germany is just sort of, people are getting into World War I. The United States is thinking about that. There's trouble in Ireland. There's like trouble all over the world. But my family was dealing with the Mexican Revolution. And we were living in Aguascalientes, my grandmother and grandfather and 4 girls. And just before they had this meeting with Villa and Carranza, the whole place became unsettled. And Wilson wouldn't protect the Nationals. My grandfather had lived there 30 years. My grandmother was Mexican. My grandfather was still a U.S. citizen. So the British sent a train up in the middle of the night, and they were working, my grandfather worked in the mines. And they sent a train up in the middle of the night, and they gave everybody British passports, and my mother and all the kids in the family crossed through the mines at night with just what they could carry. And basically they had a box of powdered milk and a picture of Our Lady of Guadalupe. And they got on the train, and they saw horrible things as they were going down to, they had to go skip Mexico City and go down to Tehuantepec, come up to Veracruz and New Orleans. So when they got to New Orleans, my grandmother, who was this most amazing person that just incredible, put her arms around the girls. And she said, you know, losing everything was the best thing that ever happened to us. She said, now we know what's really important. It's our family, our education, and our faith. Thank God for nothing. So turbulent times, and this can be political turbulence, this can be if someone gets cancer, right? You've probably experienced that. When all the crap falls away and you are focused on making it through that time. And there are also quiet places at that time when we can be really creative. And I think that, so this period of time, actually, if we can get focused about problems that we haven't solved yet and create new communities that are really important and begin to share our narratives and communicate, I think we can figure out ways to do things very differently. Okay, so what were the assumptions that we had? Well, we thought that getting more high school and undergraduate students interested in science would automatically lead to diversifying faculty and administration. We thought that better test scores would mean better students. We thought that diversity is, or should be, a priority for everyone, since we'd just gone through the whole civil rights movement, and it just seemed like it was the right thing to do. And then we thought, well, if each of our diversity programs was having some success, and you know, there are a few of our programs in the country that are just have done very well, that we'd all have an impact on faculty diversity. Well, what happened was that we did get more high school and undergraduate students interested, and we've got more postdocs, but mass action didn't work. So we don't know exactly why, and we need to be thinking deeply about the issue. I don't think, so chronic heart problems, I don't remember if I told you, but the books I read that are Harvard Business Review, Thinking Fast and Slow, I've got Scott Page on the difference, and a bunch of things from the National Academy. But the bottom line is that we went for the easy targets, right? And when you have a really hard problem that's got a lot of nodes and a complex topography, it's very difficult. I don't know if you've ever worked with people who do factorial analysis, but when we were doing microarrays, we did that. And biologists tend to think that we know where the greatest variance is coming from, and we're inevitably wrong. We need statisticians to come and help us with that. And we should have been doing that during this whole time, but we didn't. So there were things that we still don't know exactly what the problem is. We thought better test scores would make better students. Well, I worked on this about 12 years ago. What I found was that, in fact, by teaching to the test, and I don't know how old your kids are, but mine were college age about 12 years ago, and I realized that we had been afraid of them being abducted. We had decided boys needed to be active, so we put them in organized sports. So they learned how to be forwards or midfielders, but they didn't do pickup teams. And then we did this teaching to the test where we rewarded kids for memorization and not for imagination. And I spent a year, I went all over the country. I talked to AP high school teachers, people at NSF, all over the place. Everybody had a knee-jerk response. Fire the teachers, the kids are lazy, the parents are doing a bad job. That's a sign of a really cool chronic heart problem, when either people have knee-jerk responses to how to solve it or they think it can't be solved, right? And so those are the problems that I love. So anyway, we just have to work on increasing creativity, but that didn't work. So what happened is diversity is a priority for everybody, isn't it? Well, what happened was that one of the things that happened was that the Census Bureau came out with these ideas that, U.S.-born minorities were going to be, the majority of people under 20 by 2020 and the majority of people in the United States by 2050. Well, this scared people because a lot of people don't know us, I guess, or they have stereotypes about who we are if we're, a tall black guy, or if we're Hispanic in the wrong neighborhood, or, something like that. And for me, I just thought it was going to be really fun, so I didn't understand that we needed to communicate this differently and have different narratives for this. And so the thing is, it wasn't compelling. People in the United States did not go, oh boy, that's going to be fun. I mean, people in the United States thought, some really scary things about that, and I think it's something that we need to work on in terms of developing narratives about building bridges across cultures, and there are ways to do this, but we haven't even started. And finally, because each of our programs was having some success, we thought we'd move the needle, but we didn't, because honestly, we never talked to each other. All the mentors, today I had a conversation with a woman about her mentoring program. It's probably the first conversation I've had like that with another mentor. We don't talk about this. We didn't compare programs. Even though many of us were scientists, I kept saying, well, I've got 71% that are going on this way, and we got 95% employed, and everybody, but people, I guess, weren't keeping those kinds of numbers, and so we couldn't figure out what was really working, what wasn't, and so we actually could have used some of this to figure out where the bottlenecks were, but we didn't. Okay. So I'm saying we need to stop this thing and think a little bit more deeply. Whenever I get go work on it for 5 minutes and come back and we'll all share our results, and we do things too fast and people are not thinking deeply about these issues. Now, Scott Page would say that diversity is really important because 2 + 2, one person can solve. But when you get a very complex set of equations or nodes and edges, and it's got a really complex topography and multiple minima, you need people with different toolkits, right? So that's the issue. And I would be afraid to ask if any of you have heard what I would call disruptive. So disruptive is like a business term for something that really changes the way you think about something. So think to yourselves, have you heard any disruptive ideas in the areas of diversity and inclusion lately? So this is it. This is all right. Anytime something like that happens, you go, that's an opportunity. That's a space that we can really work with. So it's very exciting to me. I hope it's exciting for you. Don't fall asleep. Okay, so in 1978, this is Mark Neve's data from the AMC. 1,400 black men applied to medical school. In 2017, 1,337 black men applied to medical school. Okay, so those of you who are dealing with translational medicine and drugs and all sorts of stuff, you know that we need diversity certainly in the medical profession, right? Because you need it in epidemiology, because certain people can easily get different kinds of information than other people, and it has to do with stereotypes, but it also has to do with ability to speak to different groups or find out different kinds of information. So anyway, this deserves some serious thought. Now, there's a lot of dynamic in who's applying for medical school. In the United States right now, diversity is not in the top 10 of most people's lists, and everybody seems too busy to think. So this is a huge opportunity. So here's it. Education. We think of education as a pipeline, right? Or you've heard the educational pipeline. Well, the pipeline image is horrible, and it stops us from thinking creatively about education. In fact, I came into the pipeline way at the end. Okay, so the pipeline is not a good image because it treats students too passively. And I live in New Mexico, and I know we can have a perfectly intact pipeline. It doesn't mean we have water. In our irrigation ditch, we don't have water unless we have snow on top of the mountain. Water has to have potential and kinetic energy to flow. It has to want to flow. And the students have to want to get an education. And they have to want to do what they're doing. So then they become self-motivated. All right, let me talk quickly about beans. I love talking about beans in terms of diversity because beans are not an emotional topic. We don't think much about beans having choices about where they want to go. And so if I start with a pile of mixed beans, I can get at least 3 outcomes. I can get mixed beans again, I can get beans assorted by type, or I can get a pile of white beans. Now, what we know just generally is that energetically, these two are not favored because you reduce entropy by doing this, right? But in human communities, you see this all the time. You see it in mid-schools, you see it in churches, you see it in communities. Really, this is a very common phenomenon. And over here, this is what you see in the C-suites of organizations and among faculty and administrators and various things. And so I'm really interested in what sorts of forces maintain these separations. And I was talking at the Hutch one day, and I realized that this thing, which is really the most common, can't be just, I don't want to be with you. It's, I want to be with you. So human communities come together because we have these in-group attractions, these wanting to be together. And sometimes it's like, well, I don't like the other group. But by and large, you tend to select people that it's easy to be with because you share commonalities. So if we really believe diverse teams are important, what we need to think deeply about is how you go back and forth here to here. Now this guy's tough. I'm going to skip the in-group things. If you want to get this, I'm annotating and I'm writing the whole thing up and I'll send it to you. So this is an interesting movie. This is Jackie Robinson and Branch Rickey with Jackie Robinson. It's from, and the movie that I love is 42. So you got to watch that because it's totally about in-group, out-group stuff. Branch Rickey decides he wants to diversify the Brooklyn Dodgers. And he looks around, there's a Negro League. He finds Jackie Robinson, and he's just right because he's been on 3 athletic teams at UCLA, and he was in the Army, and so he knew he could handle hanging around with white guys and survive this stuff. So Branch Rickey becomes Jackie Robinson's career mentor. And Jackie Robinson changes Branch Rickey. And what you watch in the movie is that Jackie Robinson in the beginning, all the people around Branch Rickey don't want Jackie Robinson. He is not in their in-group, not. And they see Jackie go through this stuff, and they see him just unbelievable. He's a great baseball player, but he just deals so magnificently with challenges. And ping, he's part of their in-group. And ping, he's part of their in-group. And finally, ping, he's part of Pee Wee Reese's in-group. Watch that, because that is what we have to get this thing to work. Now, the coolest thing is at the very end of the movie. So it's the last time Jackie Robinson's been cleated on first base. And they're in the locker room. And he says, Mr. Rickey, why did you bring me into this thing? And Branch goes, well, it was the money, and it was this catcher I didn't treat right. And he goes, Mr. Rickey, tell me why you did this. And Branch says, you made me love baseball again. Okay, if you guys who are in charge of hiring, if we can figure out a way to connect you with some of our greatest students, I've tried very hard. We've got them at Harvard and Columbia and Stanford and Washington and UCSD. We've got them all over the place. If we can connect you with them, if you would see that getting to know one of our students is something you'd want to do so that you could love whatever you do again. That's what we'd like to see, and that's what Keystone's been doing. So we have a window of opportunity, and we have to rethink what we're doing. So Keystone can even enlarge what they're doing in terms of career mentors and mentees, and I'd love to see the board. You guys, I was so impressed with all the companies. I mean, I think 3 of our students are at 3 different companies here, and I'd love to just see them everywhere. we need a diverse, inclusive think tank, something where we could go for a week or two and really begin to dig deep to try to understand what the bottlenecks are in this whole thing. I don't think they're going to be too hard. The I Ching says the best way to fight evil is to make energetic progress towards a good. So I think you can go from behind one of these problems and just blow it up if you know where the bottleneck is. It's really cool. I don't know if you like to think this way, but if you do, talk to me. And we have to find common ground. We have to start working across divides. There are ways to do it. I do it in my program, and I'm happy to help anybody try to figure out how to do it. We have a mechanism in my program, that one of the principles that we work on, that really helps you get past I can't talk to you because you're different, and it's a wonderful thing. So I hope that you guys all go, wow, taco trucks on every corner. That sounds wonderful. Thank you.